Dawn and I will not be talking about handwriting or question documents today, unless it comes up in context, but that's not our plan. Today, we're talking about different areas of our experience, and you'll have 3 different avenues of opinions or insight, advice, whatever you want to call it. So I am excited that you guys are all here. If you don't know me and you're new to my channel, my name is Mozelle Martin. Not only have I been an international forensic handwriting expert since 1987, I spent 25 years as a trauma therapist and a mental health clinical director. So again, you may know Dawn from previous live events that we've done together. But for those of you who do not know her, Dawn, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Dawn McCarty, and during the day, I am a cybersecurity expert with over 20 years experience in information and cybersecurity. And I've created my own cybersecurity company, and it's called Securing Everything, where I focus on helping families stay safer online. So I'm just going to cut it there because some of the other stuff goes right into what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to pass that back to you.
Great. And our special guest today is Caroline, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to you now.
And since this is my first time, I'm going to read what I wrote. Just saying. Okay, so my name is Caroline Rena, and I do a podcast called The Ride of My Life, which over the past year and a half, I've actually been chronicling my healing journey in the podcast. As part of that, what I also do is I assist people to connect with their inner child as I hold safe space with unconditional love using energy healing and transformational guidance and coaching so they can witness the truth of who they are. And my experience personally has been that in turn, it releases stuck feelings or energies and helps the body to learn to regulate itself, which has been part of my process. Through the feeling of safety. And that opens up the opportunity to change lives in all areas, relationships, health, and work, which is what's happening with me. And most of the people I work with, developmental trauma, life trauma, birth trauma, and generational trauma. So it's all there.
So thank you so much, ladies. Before we get into today's show, I would like to see if the viewers can welcome everybody by typing in their state or country in the chat. We'd like to see where everybody is coming in from. So look at this. We have Colorado, Scotland, Toronto, Alaska, awesome. Highway Canada, Maryland, Central New York, nice. Southeast Michigan, North Carolina. This is awesome. Before we get into today's show, I have a video I'd like to show you. This video will provide some great foundational and scientific information that will help answer some questions and streamline some of our show today.
Scientists and researchers use an average period of a generation as 25 to 30 years, as determined by the age children are adults and become parents. The most important set of genetic instructions we all receive comes from our DNA, passed down through generations. Scientists have observed epigenetic memories being passed down for 14 generations. If we go to the middle of the 25 to 30 year range and multiply that by 14 generations, that means as of today, we can be experiencing ancestral trauma and memories from as far back as 1637. What was the world like in 1637? For one, there was the Mystic Massacre in Connecticut that killed up to 700 people, mostly women, children, and the elderly. There were also Puritans who were publicly mutilated for criticizing a church. There was a riot at the cathedral in England that started with a prayer book. The Dutch Republic collapsed. The 80-Year War was rampant. The Japanese rebellion of 30,000 peasants was happening. There was war in Africa, and not to mention a lot of immigration. How do you think those events would have affected our ancestors? I would imagine lots of fear, anxiety, depression, murderous rage, and so much more as people tried to either conquer or escape all of the traumas of their lives. If they did not have help processing through it, they didn't heal from it. Not healing from it stores the fear, emotional and physical agony, and even false beliefs, attitude, and biases in the brain, which can then pass on to their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. That's one way the traumas are passed down. Another way is through storytelling. They tell their children about their experiences. Those children feel the same emotions by hearing it from their parents or grandparents, and then they tell their children, and so on. We could look at all historical timelines for every year from 1637 to today and ask ourselves the same things. So many people who are anxious, emotionally uncomfortable, who live in fear, struggle with depression and suicidal thoughts, and the like, do not know why. That's because it's not their trauma. Many will say, I'm just like my mom or dad. They're anxious too. Because most likely it was not their mom or dad's trauma either. How many of your current or future generations will say that about you? The point is that science has shown that every infant is born with inherited traumas. Nobody is exempt. Nobody escapes it. At least, not yet anyway. I can tell you firsthand that my first trauma as a newborn was when I was adopted immediately after birth. Many don't see adoption as trauma. They'll say things such as, oh, but you were chosen. Okay, but before you're chosen, you're rejected by your mother. Everyone suffers trauma by virtue of being born and the related violent physical and psychic separations. The physical event of birth, where the infant moves from perfect harmony and union in the womb of the mother to the painful state of separation from that same mother, constitutes the earliest anxiety a human experiences. This is true for those who are not adopted, but is considerably amplified for adoptees as we are thrust into the arms of strangers. In other words, children are born into an inner state of confusion and chaos, and their quick exposure to bursts of unmitigated events, including unfamiliar sensory information, is drastically unbearable to the now screaming newborn. In turn, accumulation of our inherited traumas combines with our acquired traumas, combined with our lack of self-awareness and understanding, and we turn to escapism, such as drug or alcohol abuse, gambling, eating or shopping addictions, and risky sex. Not only does that make our life worse and keep the vicious cycle of shame, guilt, anger, depression, and even suicidal tendencies going, we can also pass all of those emotions and self-destructive behaviors down to our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They then pass it on for 14 more generations, which is long after you and I leave this world. So instead of the happy innocence children are supposed to be born with, we pass down a potential lifetime of unhappy challenges that we and our previous generations did not heal, and the vicious epigenetic circle continues. That's why one important step I recommend for those who grew up in domestic violence or had what they would consider mean parents is to consider the fact that their parents, too, were reacting to their own inherited traumas. Once you understand that, you can have compassion for them. They were not given the information we are sharing with you today and likely struggled with more inner turmoil than you can possibly imagine. Compassion for others provides compassion for yourself. That compassion is a form of self-love, and self-love is needed for healing. I'll apologize now if this video triggered you. However, most adults in the world have spent decades avoiding their inner self, whether being distracted with excessive work or trying to help others heal before they have healed themselves. Oftentimes, only one specific trigger is needed at a specific time to finally jumpstart their own healing journey. Perhaps this will be that trigger for you. That's why after this event, I strongly urge you to take the free quiz at inheritedtraumas.com to find out if inherited traumas are affecting your life. But right now, I have a few important questions to ask you. Can you be the one who finally ends this self-destructive inheritance? Can you be the one who finally detoxes the genetic pattern of inherited traumas? Were you chosen to break the chain? That is, the DNA chain that passes trauma down from one generation to the next? Will you be the one to save your future generations from the same self-destructive, repetitive patterns of our previous generations? Perhaps you will find out in today's show.
That was
So,
awesome.
Mhm.
so today, obviously, I feel like we're going to be delivering some thought-provoking content. And I think as varied as our personalities are, that will help others determine if and even how rampant inherited traumas, genetic patterning may have been in their life and still is, and what you can potentially do about it. So, Caroline, I'd like to start with you. What is your story? How did you come to this point in your life? How did you learn about this topic?
Well, the learning part actually came from how Dawn and I connected through something called parental alienation. And as the mother or the alienated parent, I struggled in not understanding why this was happening to me, to my children. And at the very beginning, there was like this catalyst, the breakup, where my ex-husband left and took the children with him. And from that point, I started searching in, I started searching out. And that started the whole process, because I said to myself that I was not going to let him see me get into a rubber room. That was my biggest statement. And from that point, I started to do my healing work. Most of it was external. I went through, Native American ceremonies like sweat lodges and different things like that. And then I read everything, and all these different things, these processes I did on the outside of me, and nothing, things were working, but I still didn't feel at peace. And other things like relationships, and after that, led me further and further into it. And I did personal development courses and those types of things. And then when I split up with my former partner about almost 2 years ago, that opened up a whole, deep dive into, why I started the podcast and working through isolating myself from the traumas that I had been through. And literally this past year and a half has probably been the most intense, because I chose to walk into it. I chose to take this ride, what I call the ride of my life. And I actually went around the country and stayed with friends of mine who knew different ways of healing trauma. And I started to just dive into it and learn how to re-regulate myself, because I was always dissociating because of the things that happened in my life and that sort of thing. So through that process, I went from complete isolation, from fear of connecting with people, and trying to figure out what was wrong with me, all these different things, to now everything has been released. And for the most part, except for this particular event, because it's the first one I've done like this, I can regulate myself without getting anxious. I did very well considering, and now looking forward into shifting to the next level, and being there to support others in what I've learned, and helping in breaking through these generational. And that was another thing I did, was also just diving into this whole generational trauma thing, because we had the Holocaust as part of my family's trauma. And so that was a challenge in the work I have been doing over the past couple of years as well.
So I would like to know, have you noticed specific patterns that you are like your mom or your dad or your grandma, or have you noticed a certain behavior pattern that's coming through? Habits, yes. Tendencies, things like that? Any that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess I'll share the biggest one I'm working through is the money pattern, the lack. Because the women in my family were all very traumatized during, the war, and in Europe, my family goes back into Kiev, Russia, and the Ukraine, and different areas like that. Because of those areas and they're protecting themselves, none of them knew how to connect with their children. So it was more like they could take care of us physically with the house and, whatever, but the nurturing was missing. So my mother, who all of it started with World War II for her, and she was like 4 years old when all that began, she had no idea how to nurture me. And in turn, for me, I'm nurturing. I understand how to do it. I suppose it would be through just intuition. However, I struggled connecting with my children. And it was so heartbreaking for me, especially with the parental alienation. When that happened, I was like overwrought with, I don't know what the heck is going on. I don't know how to do this. Mm-hmm. And no one's there to help me. And I'm isolating myself and not allowing anybody to help me. So it was like this vicious cycle that kept perpetuating itself during that time.
So I know that in some of the studies that I've been working on, they did show that parents who relive traumatic events become emotionally detached and numb, and they even experience dissociative episodes in their cells where it detaches them from reality, and then their symptoms, even though they don't vocalize them or articulate them to the children, can still impede the child's ability to develop a reasonable sense of safety and predictability in the world. So their foundational structure doesn't feel present. It doesn't feel safe and secure. And yes. Parents affected by trauma were found to be less able to respond in a, like you said, nurturing way during developmental crises. So they're unable to help their child comprehend the world in a healthy manner. Parents who suffer from PTSD model that kind of dysregulation of their emotions instead of that nurturing that you mentioned.
Yeah, it was definitely, like looking back, and the hardest piece that I'm finding about that is to the forgiveness piece, the self-forgiveness of, since I've been doing the healing journey, and every time, whenever something like that comes up and I see my behavior from them, it's like, I know logically I need to forgive myself because I didn't know any better at the time. Right. But actually doing that is not an easy task because, when you come from not good enough and I hate myself and, all these different things, how do you say right. Little Carrie or, Caroline, I forgive you? Well, it took
That's actually the truest form. You hear that phrase all the time where they say forgiveness is for you. It's not that you just say, okay, I forgive, because it's about the work. So you have to do the work to figure out until you can get to that place to forgive. Forgiveness isn't a blanket, it's work. And a lot of us like to just block it. And we're blocking it thinking we forgave somebody, but we haven't done the work. So we're still walking around with trauma and we're still passing that on. So what you did is you actually started doing the work so that you could get there.
Yes.
Yes. And Dawn, you have a little different focus on your path to here. Do you want to share with us what that is?
Sure. So Caroline and I come at different angles. So she's coming from the parent side. I'm from the child's perspective. So I was not exactly planned and not exactly prepared for. My mom gave birth early and didn't know what to do with me. She'd never babysat or held a baby before. So it wasn't like love at first sight or an extreme bond. I actually bonded with my father rather than my mother. And then when I was between 2 and 3, she had abandoned us. She left us both. And she went and she married someone else in another state. And then later, the two of them, after they got married, they decided, and I was almost 5 years old at this point, they decided they were going to come and they abducted me off the stairwell of the apartment complex that I lived with my dad. So they ripped me out of that world, threw me into a car. My mom is introducing this man, her husband, as my new daddy, as we're getting into the getaway car. And she's shoving me into the middle of that seat. And I'm pushing away because to me, he's a stranger. I don't know who he is. And I know who my daddy is. So that was what I remember thinking. They stuck me on a houseboat for a week to let the investigation die down. This was in LA, like Hollywood, California. And there's a massive investigation looking for this child. The child's on a houseboat waiting for everybody to just go back to normal and stop looking. And then when they felt safe, they moved me to an airport where there was a plane ready to taxi as soon as I was on board. And then from there, it was wheels up and off we went. And I never saw my dad again for 44 years. So when they got me to the new home, I had a brand new home, a new bed, all new clothes, everything was brand new. Nothing was the same for me. So I call it my twilight zone because the only world that I knew was realistic or reality just kind of disappeared. And this one felt fake. So nobody helped me through that transition. And as a result, I had an identity crisis that went undiagnosed forever, for a long time. So, and it's not where it ended. From there, my stepfather had, I had to start calling him daddy right away. That was one of the biggest things for me, was that I didn't want to call him daddy, but I was forced to. He had a daughter that was 6 years older than me who was violent, and she nearly, she strangled me to death one day. And this went on for 8 years where she was constantly violently abusing me. So I have all of this trauma in this twilight zone where I knew I didn't belong. So I didn't even really help myself. Of course, I'm a child, so how would I know? But I didn't know what was really happening. And I just went through life reacting. So that just led into bad choices. My mother was not nurturing. She did not know how to love me. She was abusive, but not as bad as my stepsister. So I went through life feeling rejected, abandoned, unsupported. I didn't feel like I mattered. I didn't feel like my life mattered, because the day my stepsister strangled me, and the life-saving breath was when our parents pulled into the driveway. They startled her, and she was clamping down on my throat. And I remember the eyes were just closing in, and all I could see were her demon eyes. And everything went black. Well, when they pulled in the driveway, she drops me. And I think that impact is what made me take that last breath of air. And I just had to run. Well, the punishment was, once they finally got me to come and sit at the same table as, I call her my demon, because I never wanted to ever see her again. I was, I need to go. I need to live somewhere else. I'm only in 6th grade at this point. She's a senior in high school. So she, all we had to do was write down on a piece of paper what happened. And what happened, this is another piece of the trauma for me, is that she was undiagnosed bipolar with borderline schizophrenia. And when she was studying for her senior finals, she wanted to sit outside in the sun, but she was fair-skinned and she always burned and peeled. So I decided I was going to joke around, and I would lock the sliding glass door as a joke. But I know, I should have known better, that you don't play a joke on someone that's violent. And she came up to the sliding glass door so fast, and her face was right there in front of mine. And all of a sudden I could see her face morph into the demon. And all of a sudden I knew my life is now in danger, and all that's protecting me is this glass door. and I panicked. Well, she ran around to the other side and started banging in the front door. She literally took in the entire front door, frame and all. It was solid oak. She laid that flat into the foyer, trying to get to me. So now I'm on my bike trying to get away, and that's when she caught me. She grabbed me off my bike by my neck, and that's when she started to strangle me. So this was leading up to that point, and she was clamping down as hard as she could, and those eyes were still there. So it's burned into my head. I'll never forget that particular look. So when they pushed a piece of paper in front of us with a pencil and said, I don't want to hear it, just write it down, I knew in that moment my life had no value, because nobody was defending it. Nobody came to my rescue when she beat the crap out of me or when she banged my head into the ground over and over again. Nobody came to the rescue. What's interesting is, fast forward this, because we have a lot of trauma to talk about why these things happen, why my mom was the way she was, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But I want to mention at this particular point is that my son has a phantom hand on his throat. He can feel the compression of me being strangled. This was when I was in 6th grade. And now he has that inherited trauma that when he gets anxious or scared, he feels it in his throat.
Yes, that is so interesting. And did he know why he had that, or did you share it with him why? Or
he heard me talking about it, and he goes, do you think that's why I have this? Just so then we figured it took a while for him to even ask me about it. Because sometimes when you get anxious or upset on the verge of tears, you feel it in your throat like you got a lump. He's like, but this isn't just a lump. It's like my throat is being compressed. Like he can feel a hand here. And you'll catch me when I'm stressed. You might see me doing this more, and I'll start making sure nothing, because I can't have things touching my neck. I can't wear turtlenecks. I can't wear choker necklaces. So when I'm stressed, I start doing this more. And he was doing that. He kept doing this kind of stuff. Like he could feel something there. He was trying to move the same hand that I think I feel sometimes.
That's very interesting. Now, is he your firstborn, or is he?
My firstborn.
Yeah. I've heard that most of the time the kids that will have the most results are the firstborn of the opposite gender.
Wow.
So the firstborn son, or if they're getting the dad side, it would be the firstborn daughter. I don't know if that's true. I've just heard that. I haven't personally done any research on that end of it, but I have heard that, and I've asked a lot of people, and it's pretty consistent, but that's what I was wondering.
Yeah. But that's interesting.
Have you seen her since?
I do not even acknowledge the fact that we are any kind of related at this point, because I tried so hard my whole life to do things that would keep her happy. So I had to regulate. As a child, I'm regulating both her and my mother, trying to do whatever it took to keep myself safe. So when we talk about the parental alienation stuff, so my mom did abduct me from my dad. She kept me from him. She did all kinds of horrible things. She poisoned my brain, or poisoned my mind about who he was and the person that he was. But the psychological abuse was intense on me, because there was emotional abuse and the psychological abuse from both my mother and my demon stepsister. So we have had interactions before. And up until 2014 was the last time I saw her my stepfather's sister had passed away. So we all went to go to the funeral, and their side of the family never accepted me. So another piece of rejection for me was that I was adopted into a family that hated me, and they wanted nothing to do with me. I was literally the redheaded stepchild. Yeah. So they just shunned me. They didn't invite me over for Christmas. I mean, it was like a thing. And they still hate me to this day. And all I did was get thrown into their world. I didn't do it on purpose. So when we were there at the wedding, my stepsister had made a comment, and the person standing in front of me is like, you don't let her say something like that to you? And I don't even know why I did it, but I just kind of like poofed her hair, like that. I'm like, just hush. And she turned around like she was going to clock me. Well, this girl has grown up, and that ain't happening. And I've had self-defense, so she'll never come at me again. And I literally wrapped my arm around her, locked her arm in, and then I grabbed her other hand So I have her locked in, and I just started swinging her back and forth and looked at her. It's like, you want to dance? And that's when she finally became afraid of me. But the significant piece of that, and the reason why I wanted to share that, is that's when her father, my stepfather, actually saw his daughter treat me that way.
Wow.
He had never seen it or refused to see it. And then all of a sudden, on that moment in 2014, that's when he finally saw it.
And did he say anything? I mean, how did you know he saw it?
Because he was standing at the other end of the hall. I could actually see him after we were all done. And he apologized. He's like, I am so sorry. I did not know that was happening. And nobody believed me. My whole life, no matter who I told, nobody believed that anything I said was true. They didn't believe I was abducted. They didn't believe that I was abused. They didn't believe any of that. My own stepfather didn't believe it. So why would anybody at church believe it? So I was the one telling these foolish stories according to everybody else. But when he saw it then, I think that's when he started to feel really bad. But in my mind, I mean, I spent my life hating my mother and my stepfather, like hating them. So yeah. I've had to do my own healing work and figure out what's going on with me. And that's when I started learning about epigenetics and seeing what happened to my mom and then her mom and her mom and her mom. And now I can kind of piece it together. So I'm writing a book now about how I stopped hating my mother. And it's really it's not about forgiveness to me. To me, forgiveness is the last thing that happens, because if we can't do that work, then forgiveness is just phony. It has to be sincere, it has to be authentic, which means we have to face our fears. We have to face what's happened to us, those traumas, so that we can understand them and pivot. And that pivot is what keeps us from reliving over and over again.
Well, that's why I was asking about how you knew if your stepdad had seen that, because I was wondering if he apologized and if you felt it was sincere, because I know a lot of times when you have a sincere apology and you know wholeheartedly in your soul that was a sincere apology, it can really help with that healing process. It's a form of release and kind of that acceptance and validation that you never had before.
Now in 2014, when he did that, I was like, too little, too late. No, just don't even. But I have come to the point where I know he was sincere. I don't think he realized. I don't think either one of my parents realized the damage that they were doing, and not just to me, because one of the things that they weren't good at was ensuring that we had medical help. So when somebody's head's beaten into the ground, most parents would take them to the hospital or the doctor, check them for a concussion. I was never checked for that. And having bipolar and schizophrenic tendencies, then she was never diagnosed until she was an adult. So all of these things were happening, but nothing was ever done. She was never given help. And then to find out, her mother left them, her and her dad. So we both had this crossover experience where our mothers abandoned us.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it was an enemy, quote unquote, situation versus a bonding, because technically you guys could have had a really strong bond having that shared experience, but it didn't turn out that way. And that's unfortunate, because I think it would have been good for both of you at that point.
Yeah, I think she was still so angry that her mom was gone and that he remarried, so that I was the one that she could control. And so, and I understand why she was able to do what she did. I don't condone it. I don't like the fact that she was able to be violent and that they were just so oblivious to what was going on. And they have seen things. They've seen wounds. They've seen lumps on my head. They've seen stuff, bruises. But I was always the one that got smacked for screaming because I was hurt.
Wow. Yeah. See, that's unfortunate. Caroline, did you have a lot of brothers and sisters when you were?
I'm an only child.
I was too.
It's a whole nother level of it, then.
Yeah. So I'm an only child too. And then just to touch on a little bit of mine, for me as an adoptee, after discovering my birth parents, through, a bunch of DNA tests. I had every DNA test that was available. I took it. I ended up finding several siblings. I ended up meeting over 400 relatives from around the world. I was lucky enough to be one of the relatively few people in the world who were able to participate in the National Geographic's Genome Project. And the results of that, it was a genetic anthropological study, and it was so much unlike all the others that are out there. In fact, I don't even know if there's one out there that is like it, but it maps your historical migration patterns by analyzing your DNA. And so it goes back to the ancient DNA, and it showed me how powerful our ancient DNA is to healing. That's how I healed from all my trauma. It was all ancient DNA. It was extremely powerful. But the most shocking scientific evidence that I acquired through the National Geographic Genome Project was that past lives really do exist. Although it is an extensive report, I did put a little video together to show you the DNA proof that we are recycled after death. But hopefully I'm a better person this time around, so I just tell myself that I was upcycled. But I would like to take a moment to show you what that looks like. I'm not giving the whole report, obviously it's lots and lots of pages long, but I do have some slides in there that will show you how it shows where my DNA was on the earth for all these thousands of years. I mean, thousands of years, we don't live to be thousands of years old. So if we think about that in perspective, I look really good for being like 120,000 years old. So if our DNA is on there, say 45,000 years ago, and then it disappears and you don't have any relatives, there's no trace of your DNA, and then it comes back like 20,000 years ago, or after that, I should say, then obviously we're coming back. Otherwise, our DNA wouldn't be there. So I am going to show you a bit of that so you can see what it looks like. So stand by, please. Ladies, if you could please mute, I'm going to mute as well.
As you can see here, it says my ancestral journey. It says that with the sample you sent us, in other words, my spit, we ran a comprehensive analysis to identify thousands of genetic markers in your DNA, which are passed down from generation to generation. We can trace the journey of your ancestors out of Africa. The results of our analysis, your personal journey, in other words, my personal journey, is outlined below. You can see here the blue is my paternal side and the pink is my maternal side. And you can see 120,000 years ago, I have a match from both sides. 65,000 years ago, I have one from my mother's side. 45,000 years ago, I have one from my father's side. And then I don't have any until basically me. So let me show you the matches that they laid out for me. My deep ancestry, which was 1,000 to 100,000 years ago. This is considered ancient DNA. But it shows here that the African branch that I was in, my DNA was in, was L3, 67,000 years ago in East Africa. The next one is branch N, and this is 60,000 years ago, and this is out of East Africa or Asia, because it's right on that cusp right there on around the border area. One of these two groups of individuals moved north, and one of them moved east. You can see how some of them end up in the Sinai Peninsula in what's now Egypt. And then some of them went into the Eastern Mediterranean region and Western Asia. So they branched off, they divided. The next one is branch R, and this is 55,000 years ago in West Asia. Because remember, I just got done saying they branched off. Well, my branch went over here to Western Asia, which is basically present-day Turkey. And then 41,000 years ago, West Asia. So you can see the years are changing. And it talks about going west to Europe. This is the end of the Neanderthals. Branch HV was, you can see here how the date range is 22,350 and then 7745 years ago, again, Western Asia. So this is the Eurasian group, like along the Red Sea, through the Near East. Ethiopia can also go into Arabia. So there's a lot of places in there that it has scattered. Branch H is 28,000 years ago, still Western Asia. This is like Iberian Peninsula, Italy, the Balkans. Then they break it down and show you even who is your genius matches. In other words, who is your main ancestor from that generation, so to speak. So it says if you go back 150,000 years, all 7 billion humans share one single common maternal ancestor, and that's the mitochondrial Eve. Her male counterpart was Adam, Y chromosome. Any two individual people that ever lived shares a match, an Eve or an Adam, at a more recent point in time. Although it's true that every two living people share a common ancestor, in reality we share multiple ancestors. Some of these common ancestors lived centuries ago, while others lived and migrated across the earth millennia ago. It says right on here, here we estimate when in time you shared a direct female or direct male ancestor with a famous historical genius. And so 0 to 12,000 years ago, I had one match, which is Napoleon. Then I had 5 matches, 25,000 to 12,000 years ago. And then, this is what I'm saying, this shows my DNA traveling. And it shows here that I had no DNA on the earth 45,000 to 25,000 years ago. So I was there before that, but I wasn't there during these years. So obviously I wasn't living, or my DNA would be on the earth, or I'd have a relative. Then it comes back. So 65,000 to 45,000 years ago. And then I have no matches 65,000 to 120,000 years ago. So again, my DNA was there, it left, came back, left, and here I am again today.
You guys are on mute, I think. So what do you think?
Wow, me too. Wow.
I've been doing epigenetics and I made it back, see, 5 generations, including me. So that's as far back as I got. And that's so interesting to see what I've discovered in what has been forwarded, down the DNA path, and the reasons why certain members of the family act the way they act and do the things that they do. So that's super interesting.
Well, and so I think that one of the other things that I learned and we had a big panel about during the research project was, and it wasn't even a big deal back then because this was back in the early 2000s when this went on. So it wasn't even as big of a deal, I don't think, as it is today. And that is this whole racial division thing. Because one of the things that we discovered in the research, and we verified, we had heard it, but we verified it, and scientists and researchers re-verified it over and over, is that every single person on this planet has African DNA. And so when we're thinking about this racial division that we have, we are all in some way, shape, or form related. They say that every 2 people share a common ancestor. So we are being mean to our relatives.
I was just going to say we learned how to hate ourselves. I wonder where that came from.
Everybody on the planet today is related through 7 generations or less.
It's just nuts, isn't it? I mean, it's just, you think about this. And anyway, that was in the early 2000s. And that Geno project is what launched me into passionately studying ancient DNA healing and the inherited traumas. And I've been studying that ever since. So it's been about almost 20 years now, but probably 10 that is more consistent, because during that first 10, I had thought I did a really good job of healing, especially with my mental health background. And then all of a sudden, I found out all this new stuff, and I'm like, holy shit, wait a minute. Now I got to do a rewind and kind of re-examine some things, some open wounds that I thought I had closed, but that weren't closed. And so I had to really go back. And then I had to look at my own parenting style, because even though I was adopted, I had the environmental influence. And I can honestly say I don't think I was a good mom. I was kind of a shitty mom. Not because I wanted to be, but I didn't know any better. And, being an only child, I didn't have any role modeling. And I didn't find my brothers until 2017 or 18. So, I mean, I was already grandma by then, but I looked at my own parenting style and realized that I passed forward a lot of the BS. But as I look back, I had the whole adopted child syndrome. So that adoption was a big trauma for me. And then to be re-victimized, by your adoptive family who's supposed to choose you, right? So there's a point in time when you have to stop hating yourself and parenting yourself and giving yourself the love that you never had. Because that the way you look at yourself, the way you talk to yourself has a lot of power.
Yeah, and when I was trying to figure out who I was as a young adult, I had no idea. I was still, growing up after my step demon went to college and I was by myself for a little while. I thought I was safe and things were going to get normal again, but then there was still the bullying and stuff. I didn't know how to respond to that kind of treatment or what was going on in the world. So I'm just this Scotch-Irish hurricane going through life and reacting to everything in a very non-effective way and making bad choices time and time again. And then when I do have kids, I chose a husband that was basically like I married my mom, and the same things kind of transpired because that's a familiarity. And I didn't know that that's what I was looking for because it felt normal. It felt familiar. So when we don't address these things, we tend to stay in that cycle there. And I wasn't helping myself, but I did not know any of this until I found my biological father, which was 44 years later. So in 2016 is when I finally found him and we reunited and I got to meet, I found out I had 3 brothers, and it was an amazing reconnection for us where I finally felt like I was back to myself. And that's when I started getting work with the identity crisis and doing the work then. So even though I started earlier on in the earlier 2000s, you can't heal what you don't know. So yeah. I didn't know all these things. Nobody identified me as having an identity crisis yet. They told me, you're dealing with toxic people, you need to get away from them, the standard stuff, but nobody really addressed me until I started realizing. And then when I started understanding that psychological abuse that I went through with my mom trying to alienate me away from my father, that's when all of that started sinking in too. And Carolyn and I worked together a lot on trying to advocate for this. And she's one of the protagonists in the film of Erasing Family. And I'm just one of the associate producers. But that film has really created a path for a lot of healing for many of us as well, because it validated us.
Yeah.
Now validated and supported. And that healing comes now out of understanding.
It was funny that you mentioned that you were like a
hurricane. This red-headed Scotch-Irish hurricane.
Well, they called me the Taz tornado when I was a kid because I was so violent. I was so angry all the time. I threw things, I smashed things, and
we have something in common. I was Hurricane Carrie.
I dented in locker doors. I pulled the paper towel dispenser off the wall.
Oh yeah, I was so violent and angry all the time. And I remember, I was bullied as a kid too. And I think at the time, they didn't know what Asperger's was. They didn't even know what autism was. It wasn't even a diagnosis till 1981 when I was a junior in high school. And so I didn't know. I know I had to go for testing, but I didn't know what kind of testing. I didn't find out until 2007 when my mom passed away, and I was going through all of her, they were hoarders. So I went through all of her stuff, and I found a canceled check for $500. Now, $500 in 1981 was pretty good money. And they had paid my doctor to keep the autism diagnosis out of my records. So I didn't even know until 2007, but I suspected something because of different things. And I consider my Asperger's a gift, but I didn't fit in. And I think now looking back, I was bullied because I was different. I look back and see parts of my life where if I would have known, I maybe would have handled it differently. But secrets were rampant in my family. And so being able to discover those and unravel those through the DNA testing and meeting first cousins and such has been very enlightening.
One of the things that I discovered, well, twice, but the first time I ignored it. One of the things I discovered about myself is being a highly sensitive person, empath, that type of thing. But I took a test online that showed me that there's like 27 traits in being highly sensitive, and I had 26 out of 27. So I could literally feel other people's emotions. I could feel animals if they were sick, all these different things. And I thought that there was something wrong with me. And people were always telling me, you're so emotional and do. But it was like you were saying, it's like a gift because I can feel what other people are going through. And if like you have this certain look on your face and I feel that energy of that look, I could say something to you like, are you okay? Where most people wouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. And people used to be like, oh my God, how did you know? And it took me forever and really until probably the last 6 months to just take that in and feel good about myself that I have this ability. And that's how I work with other people because I feel you, literally I feel you. And it was so painful for me growing up in the same, in similar ways because my dad used to say that to me. My ex-husbands used to say that to me. My friends used to say it to me. And I always thought that there was something wrong. That's my superpower. That's the thing that gets me through my life and helps me to help other people. I'm like, I can deal with this now,
And piggybacking on what you said, Caroline, when I look at somebody's handwriting sample, I actually feel exactly what they're feeling. I do the same thing. I can feel it energetically when I'm in a room or something. I can feel like, okay, that person's just like repelling me or whatever. But when I look at somebody's handwriting sample, I am feeling so like everything that's going on. And so I think that part of the reason why people, reply and they're like, holy shit, how did you know all this? Is because I'm feeling it. I'm there with you. And so being able to do that, I think is a gift because it was really helpful as a trauma therapist, because I didn't want them to have to talk about things that they were uncomfortable with. So I had them write things down and I would just wait till after hours and go through and do their personality profile and really get to know them. And then we could get together the next time and streamline their treatment based on what they were feeling. And I was able to tell them what they're showing in their writing versus them having to talk about what's going on and then taking the chance on re-triggering everything.
So one with the DNA that you were talking about and the family reconnecting, and then what Caroline said too. So that's one of the things that I did is when I reconnected with my father, he lost his mother when he was 14. So that we have some trauma on that side as well. He never knew his father. So there's that as well. So you can see patterns repeating themselves. But I did help him reconnect with his mother's side of the family through a DNA test on Ancestry, where his cousin started reaching out to me and saying, who are you? We know everybody in the family, but we don't know who you are. So when they found out I was his daughter, they were excited. They're like, oh my gosh, we lost track of him. What happened to him? Where is he? So he was able to speak to them before he died. Now he died 2 years after we reconnected. So I only had that little short window with him, and we lived across the country from each other. But because I was able to reconnect him to his family, that was something that was like a gift. He got his daughter back, and then he got his family back before he left. And then what's interesting after that is, I went on this DNA family road trip, basically, and I drove around and meeting my living relatives through the DNA. My father's real father was a completely different person we never even knew about. But what that brings is now this whole family has been reconnected, his paternal side as well. I have living aunts and uncles right now, and even more cousins, who have embraced me without ever even knowing. And then they had to discover secrets as well, because their father had children nobody knew about. So there's all that. And so that was all a big surprise. So it was so healing for me, though, to use DNA as part of my trauma recovery. So that was a huge part of it. In doing the epigenetics and researching, especially on my mother's side, I found out that my great-grandmother was clairvoyant, and a couple other clairs. I think there's like 7 of them. She had a lot of those. And I always had this ability to, and I would say things to my mom. I would tell her things that I've seen, and she would just like, whatever, not even acknowledge that I had any kind of information. And she did that to me up until I actually saved her life with it. And when I saved her life with it, now she listens to me. Now she knows that whatever this premonition or these intuitions or feelings or visions or whatever they are that I get that I didn't even consider as a gift, I had to learn at this stage, where I'm like, I think it was probably within the last 5 years, I'm learning more about these as gifts. Like, it was just a thing that I'm not going to tell anybody about it because it sounds funny. Who do you tell that you have ESP or any of these?
Your cousin right here, because she has them all too.
So it was something that I just never really even talked about until recently. And now I'm like, well, heck yeah, I have this gift. I've always had this gut instinct or intuition that I was shunned for.
There was something that's interesting that you're saying that, because the last thing I wanted to say about the highly sensitive thing or empath, for people who are highly sensitive and empathic, the traumas that we were talking about before are more intense in our physiology.
I wanted to say that too. We had to be hyper vigilant, and that really but that also makes us better, well, not better, but it also makes us more aware and intuitive as healers to help other people because of that. But you have to, like you're saying, you have to heal yourself first before you can do that, because if somebody talks to you about a trauma and you're not healed, it's going to trigger you, so we don't want that either. Well, it's definitely helped me in the criminal justice side, because I can look at things and I just have this gut feeling, and that's based off of my own hypervigilance and my own awareness of the way I read people. Because I learned very young how to read people because I had to. I didn't know it was an ability. I just did. I just notice people's body language, and I know when I'm afraid, and I have my own spidey senses that start going off. And so now it kind of naturally helps when I'm doing an investigation, or when and if I'm doing an investigation. So it does help. So this trauma that we talk about, and one of the things I wanted to say, because we've been talking about a lot of negative things about it, and although all of our traumas sound really painful, and and a lot of people are expressing in the comments, oh my gosh, we're so sorry that's happened to you. I want to make sure that everybody understands that I think in the 3 of us, maybe at this point, I know I am, so I don't want to speak for you, but if you are, you can agree or not. I've come to the place where now I realize that all that trauma happened for me.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen to me. I had to go through all that crap, and I had to climb my way out of hell just to be where I'm at today, because my purpose aligned now in 2020, in December of 2020 is when I had my big epiphany. Like, I had this epiphany bridge just come together, and everything clicked all of a sudden. So you think, why is she in cybersecurity if she's talking about this? My company is called Securing Everything, and it literally is everything. So if I'm talking about childhood trauma, if I'm talking about keeping kids safe online, if it doesn't matter what I'm talking about, I can pivot and go in any one of those directions. And it gives me a unique ability and some, the authority and the credibility to talk about these things when I don't have a PhD or anything like that. But, I may not be a clinical psychotherapist but I'm not trying to diagnose people. I'm just trying to help people figure out how they can find a path to healing. And then they need to go find somebody that can help them with that. But, it happens for us. And as hard as that is to swallow sometimes, it's because we haven't really opened our own eyes to see, what is this telling me? What is happening?
And that's why I named my book The Initiation, because I feel like my trauma was an initiation into who I am today. And I think when you look at that differently, because I was raised in a haunted 1800s hotel, I have over 250 pictures in my book, but I talk about my first friends literally were shadow people. I had nobody else. And it still talks about trauma, but it does it in a way that's empowering for people who are trying to figure out their own initiation. Because I think if you look at it as these are detours and derailments that you had to go through to get on your right path, you can understand your life better. And it does help with, I can take this skill and do this. And I've acquired the ability to, listen to my gut instinct to keep me safe.
And Mozelle, all it takes is a decision. I mean, sometimes we don't know that we need to know that we need to make this decision. But when that thing that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired hits, and you make the decision to switch, it's not even really that I've discovered the action step that's the answer. It's the decision to do it that shifts, like providence to everything in the universe shifts and everything changes, and it just steps us into this place of moving forward.
It's the decision to face your fear, because we put things off because we're afraid of what it means. So the fear that we have to turn and face, and then work through that. And I think realizing that, I used to be afraid of everything. I was afraid of everything and afraid of nothing at the same time, believe it or not.
You know what? That's the shadow. That's the work that's part of the work that I do, is the shadow work. Yeah. It's like bringing light to the shadow and discovering the truth of who we are inside of ourselves. And the light is in there, but we're so scared because of all the things that have happened to us, or we've been told, or whatever all that is. And it doesn't help until we make that decision to discover really how strong and powerful we are.
Like, let's look at society today. I mean, we talk about, you mentioned, Caroline, the Holocaust, right? That was something in your family.
Yes. Like
family trauma. We have people who remember all this, was it like a year or two ago, where it was all about Juneteenth? It was all about the slavery thing and all that, right?
Yes.
We have a lot of that vibe going on. I don't hear it as much as I used to, but last year or whatever, it was a more strong vibe about that slavery word being used. And there is no culture in the world that is immune from having committed those types of behaviors and actions. So I think that what's happening, you have starvation, people who were like at the Great Depression, you have natural disasters, people who have lived through tsunamis or various things, hurricanes, you guys are in Florida. I mean, you have all of these things that leave residual traumatic effects. And so we live in a day and age right now where we have access to so much information. So are we using the access to information in a positive way? If you can look for information and you can research self-awareness tools. Yeah. I mean, I don't think so much of society doesn't know what that looks like. And unfortunately, if shit hits the fan like it did in the Great Depression, or did in 1939, like Chris McDonald said a couple weeks ago, is that what it takes to make people feel grateful to be alive again? Is that what it takes, something that drastic?
Bring people together?
Bring people together?
That's a that's an interesting question, because what I hear when I hear you say that, what hits me is that, again, going inside, we have to be able to find that kindness inside of us. We have to be able to recognize that we are kind inside, but we also have the opposite going on too. We have potential to do not so nice things. All of us do. Mm-hmm. But to be able to understand every aspect of who we are inside of us, because the outside world is just a projection of who we are inside. And so if we're kind, that's all you're going to see is, for the most part, is kind people, because you don't really have that availability to see other things, and you just come out that way, and and it helps people, the energy of kindness. So it's not like you can take society and make them kind because such and such happened, or whatever. Right. It's coming from the inside out. So healing, going back to healing again, you got to heal to find the truth of who you are, the love inside, the kindness, the generosity, the compassion, being able to look in the mirror and say, I love you, which took me 8 years to do. And when that happened, and now I see myself when I go out in public, I'm like so much more calm, so much more settled in myself. And Dawn, you knew me a year and a half ago. We connected a lot back then. And I was not in this space. I don't remember. I mean, even when we did interview,
you were in a divine storm, girlfriend.
I was in a divine storm. And it's so powerful. Walk out there and just feel calm. And be okay with the stuff going on, and be able to, like just before we got on here, I'm like walking around the room here going, God, I'm okay. And then I felt it. I see myself differently now, and it's very cool. I'm just saying it's cool.
Awareness, the recognition of your emotions, and being able to validate yourself.
Yes. And being okay with, if I'm having a moment where I'm angry, that's just an emotion. It's just going to flow through me, but it's not going to flow through if it hits on those other emotions that are already stacked up from childhood. It has no place to go. But if you work on yourself and you learn how to release these things and recognize anger as an emotion or any of the other emotions, it flows. And then it's like, oh.
I think what's important is that when you think about healing, sometimes when you talk to someone else about, you got to start your healing journey, they're like, what is that? I don't know what that means. Right? It's overwhelming. Yeah. And they're like, okay, what healing means is taking control of your life, being in control of who you are, understanding where you came from and now where you're going. Take control of your life by doing the work. Yes. Because if you don't do the work, like Mozelle said, you're going to be repeating this in 40,000 years again, or however.
Right. Exactly. This is the longest relationship I've had, and it's been 13 years. I am not a relationship person. I love my time with me. I am my favorite person to hang out with, and other people tend to drive me insane when they're in my space. So I don't do relationships well. We have come to the conclusion a long time ago that we are together to fulfill a past life contract.
Yes. It's the laboratory.
That is why we are here. Yes. And my daughter and I are not communicating. We haven't communicated for a year and a half. That was both of our choices. We had this conversation that we don't want to be at odds with each other, because we don't want to come back in the next life together. Literally, that's it. I mean, I told my husband, I want to get this done now because I don't want you next time. It's so 100% opposite. I mean, literally 100% opposite. The only thing we really have in common is karaoke. That's it.
That's fun. Okay.
And yeah, it's fun, but I'm like, there isn't a lot of common ground here. And so we look at it like, look, we have to play this out because we don't want to do this again with each other. And so we are in a place where I have set those those precedences up with the people in my life. And I think that what makes the difference, and I believe this full-heartedly because of the studying I've done, is that if you are in each other's lives and you are making each other miserable, let's say there's a lot of drama between you, and let's say you're passive aggressive and backstabbing and creating problems and all that crap. If you're messing with somebody else's life, I can guarantee you're coming back next time around with them and you're going to work it out. If you can coexist and be either just accepting of each other, even if you're not communicating, but there's no dark action attached to it. Mm-hmm. You just allow each other to live. You have to have that discussion and agreement saying, look, we don't like each other now. We're going to like each other even less next time around. So let's resolve this now so we don't drag it into the next time period. Mm-hmm. Because that's not what you want to do. The whole purpose of coming back and getting recycled or upcycled is to be a better version of you than you were before. But I think you have to come to terms with, if I'm at odds with this person and I freaking hate this individual, I have to come with terms with that, or I'm going to be doing this again with them. Mm-hmm. And only you could decide if that's what you want to do. Yeah. But I know for me, I don't want to do that shit anymore.
Some of this is so new to me. And I've always wondered there's got to be more to than just dying and staying there forever until there's one judgment day, right? So being raised as an LD, as a Mormon, there's only one way to believe, right? That's it. There's no nothing. They don't even want you investigating too much into science and any of that. So hearing this now, before I was kind of always an outcast when it came to being a member anyway, because I guess the way people read me was that I wasn't conforming to their ways. So I was automatically just kind of an outcast. It just the way it was. Probably because my inner being, or whoever I am inside, knew that it didn't click, and I probably displayed that in my personality, my body language or whatever. Unknowingly, unconsciously, you don't know that you're doing that kind of display, more or less. But now when I come out and I start, I'm no longer a member, or I don't go to church anymore. And I'm listening and hearing all these different things and things that come to me through my DNA that I have a hard time disbelieving.
Yeah.
So for some reason, it's like I have this, like, it just clicks that, yes, that is truth. I don't know why. It just clicks because it's part of that DNA. But when someone's on the outside trying to tell me a different story or a different method, I have a hard time believing that. So it's like sometimes our truth and our instincts come through that channel of that transgenerational messaging, because it's not all trauma. There's a lot of it comes through the trauma, but our reactions are caused by the trauma, and our behaviors can be caused by the trauma, and that's displayed. But we're also displaying those agreements that we do agree with, those messages that we have this innate, inherited truth.
Like with my daughter's situation, part of loving myself and loving her is realizing that I can love her or anybody from a distance. Mm-hmm. So putting up a boundary, if somebody is not good for you to be around, if all of a sudden you are feeling really shitty about life and yourself, that person's clearly not a good energy match for you. Doesn't make them bad, makes their energy not a match for you. I think that's part of the way if you look at it. If you look at people as being bad or good, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Because everybody is human. There's black, there's white, and there's gray.
I'm still learning boundaries because I wasn't allowed to set boundaries as a child. Boundaries were created for me, and those were permanent as far as that goes. So it's part of that healing journey when you're so enmeshed with that one of your parents that you don't really know how to set a boundary because you weren't able to, you weren't taught to. It wasn't appropriate. I used to think, I'm a people pleaser, but I'm not really a people pleaser. I'm a protector of myself. I'm protecting myself by making sure those people around me were happy. So I don't like it when people say I'm a people pleaser. Unless you love to entertain and put on parties, that is an okay expression of people pleasing. But anything else is sometimes you're just protecting yourself. That's self-preservation. not necessarily a people pleaser.
Well, it's kind of like when people are they say they're walking on eggshells. You know, I had to do that with my daughter. I had to walk on eggshells, not knowing what to expect. And because I didn't know what to expect, she didn't know what to expect from me. So we were feeding off of each other because we're trying to wait to see who's going to react what way. And you find yourself in this negativity that you feed off of each other. And somebody has to step out of it and make that change. Yeah. And it usually has to be the stronger one or the more insightful one who can do it. But maintaining those boundaries can be tough. I didn't learn how to set boundaries until I went into the mental health work, 20, 30 years ago, maybe now. But when you set them, and it feels foreign at first because you're like, you have guilt. This person said they're going to kill themselves if I leave. What if I leave and they do that? That's not your responsibility. And that's a hard place to be. That is that person's responsibility. You are in charge of your actions. They are in charge of their actions. That's it. End of story. You are not in charge of somebody else's decisions. And I think that's a hard place to get to if you're not used to being there.
Yes.
Because that's that guilt. And then it's also part of an enmeshment as well. Yeah. You're enmeshed to that person to an extent that their outcome affects you to that where you're going to change what you would normally do to meet that person's needs.
It's like codependency,
Yeah. The clinical psychotherapist, when I was getting a divorce and I was so depressed and I had to, I brought my 2 sons with me, but I had to leave my stepdaughter with my ex-husband. Now, there's that little piece in there where I had that stepdaughter, which is kind of repeating the pattern of life, right? So, but I was trying to be the mother I never had to her. And I was trying to be the best mother I could, not knowing how to be one before my kids were born. So I wasn't even a mom when I became her mom. But when I went to this therapist, the clinical psychotherapist, he was asking me questions because I thought, am I totally screwing up my kids? Is my life totally screwed up? What is wrong with me? Why am I so depressed? And he went through a series of questions and he's like, look, there's nothing wrong with you. You're making plans. You're trying to take care of your kids. You're doing everything a mom should be doing. Everything looks great except for one thing. He says, you need to remove toxic people out of your life. So stop talking to your ex-husband and stop living with your mother. So because I moved in with them so that they could help me watch the kids. I could go to school to get a decent job so I could take care of them. And he's like, no. And he wrote on a pad, the prescription pad, move out of your mother's house, and handed that to me. And today I wish I had that. I wish I had that framed because I didn't know what it really meant until like years later. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was brilliant.
One of the things I wanted to share about, that's important. Like you're reminding me about me walking through that whole codependency piece, especially after leaving the last relationship I was in. Because because of my, and this is what I've learned over the last, year and a half, because of my desperate fear of the loss of love from other people, I had to make sure that everyone else was okay before I even looked at myself. And then when I started to recognize that and release whatever that, now I can't even remember at the moment to share what the energy was about that. It was just so intense for me. I think maybe it was the abandonment or whatever because of the fear of loss. But once I started to release that, then I was able to set the boundaries. I stopped going, oh, what can I do for you? That type of thing. Just to make sure you're okay, so I'm okay. And that was my way of controlling my surroundings, because having that fear of loss, that's where I felt so out of control. So that's why I did that. Was mine, but that's why I did it. So I just wanted to share that because that's one way.
That's regulation. And I would regulate my mom that way, because if she got angry, I was afraid, because, I have names for my mom's moods. We'll just call them moods. Because I call them personalities, but she's not like, but she has the gatekeeper, which is I'm scared to death of the gatekeeper. That's the one that has little eyes that bounce back and forth and they turn super brilliant green. Scary. Every time I was in trouble, the gatekeeper was who I was addressing. And then there's this princess, which I can't stand. The princess. Oh my gosh. It's not like hairs and nails princess. She's so high maintenance because I had to regulate to keep that person or that mood happy. And if I felt like she was angry at all, I would be like scouring, trying to figure out, okay, what do I got to do? I need to go buy her something. So I would literally go buy her something to make her happy again. And then she has the 10-year-old. The 10-year-old, I get along great with. We have a blast. We do movies and, lunches and shopping. And, it's literally, those are the different levels of my mother that I have to figure out, who is she? Is she the gatekeeper or the princess? Because it's time to run. Just got to get out of there. So yeah, and the reason why she's the 10-year-old is that's her arrested development. And I think, Mozelle, I just shared this with you recently, where when she was 10, so here's some of that epigenetic and that trauma that's passed through DNA. When she was 10, she was walking home with her best friend, and they had, remember the doors that were in the back that went into the kitchen, not the front doors, like the back door, and you went right into the kitchen. Mm-hmm. They went through that door, and as soon as they opened up the door, her brother was sitting at the table cleaning his shotgun, and it startled him, and the gun went off, and it shot her friend in the head while she was standing right next to her.
Oh, geez.
She turned around and walked home. My mother turned around and walked home and blocked it out right then. It didn't happen. She didn't see that. She didn't hear that. If you pop a balloon in front of her, though, she's going to be all claws on the top of the ceiling. She's just it's definitely a huge trigger. She's never gotten help for it. When she's had the wrong kind of help. So it re-traumatized her. So now we'll never get her in for help because it's too traumatizing. And we didn't have that trauma informed. And that's important when you're getting work for trauma, is you need to work with people that are actually trauma informed. And she didn't have that. So she'll probably never get help, but that she's in that frame of mind, that childlike personality a lot. And that's, as a kid growing up, that's the one I could relate to more. That's the one I was the happiest with. But the other ones showed their head way too often. But it just shows you how trauma can be, her own trauma caused problems that she's passed forward as well. And then her mother wasn't very kind to her at all. She wanted a boy. So she shunned, rejected, and neglected my mother, who in turn shunned, rejected, and neglected me.
Yeah.
So it's a pattern. It's not like my mom is just a bad person. I had to learn this. This is something that didn't just come naturally because I grew up hating her. I hated her, and I hated her husband. So for letting the shit happen to me, that they just sat by and I just didn't make sense. Why do you let that kind of crap happen? So learning what her mom did to her, and then what happened to her mom, I had to go look at my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was married off at the age of 14 because her father got remarried because her mother died. So she has no mother to show her through those very important years of being a teenager, and she's just married off to some guy in the carnival. So she's traumatized with that. And then she marries someone from Athens, so he can speak Greek. So, now that you got all these different pieces that are being pushed around, we don't even know if she actually literally got a divorce. So was she really married to the guy from Athens? We don't know. It's hard to say. But so you can see from those different generations on my maternal side, we didn't have a good history of mothering. We just don't have it. It's not there. Yeah. It's just non-existent. So now with my kids, and I wasn't the greatest when they were little, but I've had to do some work on them with them now as adults. Mm-hmm. Now that they know, okay, these things happen to me, and this is why I react the way I react. And a good example is one of the things that was huge was this fear. And I was always afraid of being attacked because I was attacked my whole life. So when I had debt collectors coming after me, I'm a single mom, and now all of a sudden they want to repo my car. And, I've got trying to pay off everything in my marriage was in my name except the house. So the car is in my name, the credit cards everything's in my name. So I'm trying to hide from these people. And I literally I found anything I could find. I couldn't afford to go buy drapes or curtains. So I found tinfoil, and I put tinfoil on my windows on the downstairs just so I could keep people from looking into my house. Yeah. Because the fear has just overwhelmed me. So I asked my kids, what was it like for you with a mom that had so much fear that I wouldn't even let you open the front door if someone knocked, which I think is a safety thing. I'm still claiming that was good. You don't let your kids open the door. But, you know, I just wouldn't let them do things. And they said, well, we thought it was normal until we started hanging out at our friend's house and they didn't have tinfoil on their windows. And I said, you know, so they were able to open up and have total freedom to speak and tell me exactly how they felt and how it affected them and how does it look to them today. Like, are they exhibiting any patterns off of that? So it's important that when you do the healing, you kind of have to sit down. If you want to stop that transgenerational trauma from pursuing, you've got to have that sit down and have this conversation so that they are healed through your healing.
But on top of that, I think it's important to, I mean, we're all going to story tell. That's just what we do. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to tell our kids about an experience that was unpleasant for us. But I think that the key is, instead of saying, you know, like passing it down saying, you know, I don't like Chinese people because I had this bad experience with Chinese people, you're automatically giving them a bias that they have no business having. So I think if you try to put a positive spin, hey, this happened, but I learned how to blank.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You're helping them understand, and we're not passing forward the dark side of the trauma experience, passing through the strength and the tools to get through it, so that we're literally passing through resilience to them.
I won't say that they were angry. I think that they were frustrated and, you know, like, oh, it's just, you know, that's her being bitchy again or whatever it was. I think they have a better understanding of me and what I went through because we've opened that and we've shared that. And that openness is really helping both sides, because now I get to say, hey, I'm sorry for being so shitty. I'm sorry for acting the way I didn't realize it was going to affect you. And I didn't know how to address it or deal with it. I was kind of out there on my own. So now it's kind of a reciprocal understanding. And when I'm triggered today, I can tell them, okay, this is triggering me, and this is why. And I need you to understand this is why I'm not yelling at you. I'm yelling because I'm triggered, so I need to work through that, and I need you to help me. So we don't get into an argument. We need to just talk through this. And so we're getting better at gauging.
Can I share something about it? Like, Dawn, you know my experience with my son. Mm-hmm. You've seen all that stuff. But I just wanted to share, like, when I mentioned that I went through a personal development course back in 2014. And when I went through it, we went through it together, my son and I, and he was 24 at the time. And what I learned out of this working on our healing together type of thing has really expanded. But I just wanted to share, at that course, one of the things that they did with us is they had us sitting across from each other, looking into each other's eyes. And it was my job. It was his job to tell me whatever he needed to tell me because of all the experience we had with the alienation stuff or whatever he was feeling. Obviously I can't remember in this moment. So he was given the opportunity to say whatever he needed to me. And I had to sit there and listen to it and then respond verbatim to what he said so that he knew that I heard him.
Listening. Yeah.
Yes. And I wasn't that good at that back then. But because of that, it opened up a space where he knew back then even that I was available to him. I mean, it took a lot for him to step into that. And then recently he said something where it felt to me, my trigger was, it felt like, why are you talking down to me? But I was able for the first time in my life to say to him, I think that when you are feeling something and you don't want me to help you with it or whatever, which I don't, I really don't help him with anything. I support him in whatever his decisions are. But if I say something and he starts going into that mom thing, now I'm like, okay, I think that if you're having a hard time with something, that all you have to do is tell me that and be open and just share that piece with me. I'm having a hard time with something. I don't really want to talk about it right now. I'll let you know if I'm ready, any of that kind of thing. I'm fine if you say that. Mm-hmm. But if you talk down to me because of mine, we watch it, we've learned how to gauge that with each other now. And now he's able to recognize that. And I can't even begin to tell you how open our relationship is now, where he's seeing a therapist, and that therapist gave him a process to do, and he did the process, and it helped him so much that he shared that with me. And I was like, oh, wow, this isn't, and I'm sitting here, thank God we weren't on video when we were talking, because he's sharing this with me and I'm tearing up for him. And I can hear him crying and, whatever. And I'm like, finally, when we got through the whole thing, we ended up doing a FaceTime. And he was like so grateful and so thankful for being able to, and he told me, I felt so much closer to you in understanding you after I did this process. And I'm really grateful that we have this. That's how we heal generationally. It's like when we do our work, we're able to support the next generation in doing their work. But if we're not healed, we're not even a safe space for them.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason we end up with such crappy relationships with people is because we're in a place that's not healthy. And so we attract, our unhealthy part is attracting that person's unhealthy part.
Yes.
If one of us gets in a place where we change, it's no longer a fit. Mm-hmm. And so you're now not fitting into a relationship that you once fit in. So the whole term outgrowing each other is you do outgrow each other. If one of you does the work and the other one doesn't do it, and even if you both do it, there's nothing saying you're going to stay together, because what brought you together was unhealthiness.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, that attraction. Yep.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people, and I don't think a lot of people realize that we get addicted to personality styles. So when somebody says, I have a type, I always get the narcissistic pricks, I always get the gold diggers, I always get whatever it is. Yeah. We have a type. That is an addiction. We are addicted to a specific type of personality. And so when we keep seeing those patterns and we're not healed, changing faces, names, and places isn't going to do anything. Right. It's like trying to outrun yourself. You take you with you wherever you go.
That's right.
So you might as well just stay where you are and work on your stuff.
Yeah. That's why I decided to stay single, because I can't do something with someone if I'm going to try and fix me, because it just it's a distraction.
Yeah.
So it was easier I needed to learn who I was, because I had no business being in a relationship that I didn't even know who I was and expecting them to love me.
And that makes a lot of sense. But the other side of the coin of that is when you are in a relationship, there's a whole nother level of growth, because you have someone to work with. Like you were like Mozelle.
Are you working with them, or are you still trying to figure yourself out?
That's the relationship you get to attract, is the person who's willing to work with you and grow themselves.
That's where it's possible now. But before, I was just one after the other. It's like, Jesus, stop.
Yeah, I heard one person say, it was a religious guru, after you're with somebody for 10 years, stop and evaluate your current position. If that person has not helped make you, or fed you enough that you want to be a better person, then it's not a good relationship. It hasn't helped you grow.
Yes.
It has actually stifled you. It is not the right relationship for you. And I think so many of us stay in relationships that are not good for us, for financial reasons, for convenience, because we're like, oh man, I don't want to even start over with somebody new explaining my crazy family, or whatever it might be. So I think what we do is we end up just settling, and settling is unfair to ourselves, fair to the other person that's in the relationship with you.
Right. So Caroline, have you ever heard me say the next person I date, they're going to have to go through this regimen of tests? Like, I'm going to have to see their handwriting. I'm going to have to know who their parents are.
No, but I can see why you would do that.
Yeah, I have a list of stuff that if I ever date, they're going through, and I'm going to interview their friends, their family. I'm going to interview their exes. I mean, people laugh, and I've talked to people that are like, why would you have to go through all that? Because I have to make sure.
Do this anymore.
That it's a fit, and it's her fault. It's Mozelle's fault.
Yeah, I know. I know that's the thing. Like, I think what I call the itty bitty shitty committee, it's those little voices in your head. You're not smart enough. You don't deserve love. Nobody would love you. You can't show your true personality because you'll be rejected. There are so many messages
yes. Go ahead.
There are so many. I just call it the itty bitty shitty committee because that's what it is. But here's the way I disarmed them. As a trauma therapist, this is what I said. If your neighbor came over, or your friend or whoever came up to you and said all that stuff to you. Look, if I came up to you, Dawn, and was like, yeah, you're worthless, you're stupid, you're never going to succeed, don't even bother trying. Or I said to Caroline, I'm like, hey, Caroline, nobody's going to love you. Don't be your true self. You need to be what that society expects you to be, or that person. You guys are not going to tolerate that, right? I would hope not. Right. So
some people tolerate that though, and I've been there. I get it.
My point is like, how do you counteract those things? So what I did way back, go on my therapy clients, give them this tool, and say, look, you could totally ignore it, in which case it's going to keep coming back and probably stronger. You could fall into that and listen to them, and just shut those down for a while and just do exactly what your shitty committee wants you to do. And therefore you're living down to your own expectations. Mm-hmm. Or you can credit it and then politely disagree. So for example, whenever those things come up, because I still get them every now and then, I'll say, look, I understand you. I don't agree with you. And they go away immediately.
I have an experience with my stepfather who, I was raised Mormon. There's a very patriarchal type of situation. I wasn't trained to be successful in, corporate America. I was trained how to set a table. I mean, literally sent to etiquette school so that I could set a table appropriately. I had to do everything like to be the Molly Mormon. And
if I know that about you, I would never.
I hated it. So I remember they would come over for dinner or holidays. I was always the one that cooks because I'm the one with the kids. So if you want to have holiday dinner with us, then we're doing it at my house because this is where their stuff is. So that was just the way I did that. But they would always kind of dig at me for not having the perfect clean house. And I'm like, look, I don't live in a magazine cover house. My house is lived in. Yes, and I'm not a hoarder. I wasn't disgusting. I mean, the dishes were done, and I would clean up, but occasionally you might have to move a pile of papers off the couch. I'm just saying. So the kids were often, they have blankets everywhere, paper airplanes, crayons, Legos, their stuff, their kids' stuff. And they would always come over and they would kind of dig at me about not having this clean house because, my husband would expect a clean home, and it used to just like, ooh, you say that to me one more time. But then one time he knocked on my door, and I don't know what was different about this time, but I opened up the door because it was locked, so he couldn't come in. So I opened up the door, and he's like, I think it's important that your house is clean. If Christ were to show up at your house, would you be okay to present your house the way it is today? And I looked at him and I said, if Christ showed up at my house, he'd asked, what can I do to help? Instead of digging at me. Mm-hmm. And I never heard another word from him again.
Back in 1987, when I came up with the clinical graphology program, a lot of people didn't have access to mental health locations. They were in small town America, or they had one psychologist or one therapist in town. They didn't want the church ladies to see their car parked at that location. Mm-hmm. So there was various reasons, but that program is powerful because the number one activity for your brain is language, and that includes how you talk to yourself and think about yourself and your life. The number two powerful tool for your brain activity is the act of handwriting, which is why clinical graphology is so powerful. And the third is music. So if you mix the three together, you're doing different writing strokes that are healthy for you, which is specific. you're thinking about those thoughts that the writing represents and the changes you're going to make and the ones that you desire. And also you have music on. And I'm not talking about words music, because if you have words, that just distracts you. The healthiest one that your brain really loves is the sound of water, because it is the sound that we heard in the womb. So if you can write, think the positive things, and listen to water sounds, you can do so many powerful changes and so much healing process with those three together. So it's really important to find the tools that work for you. Some people like drumming. Some people like singing bowls. Some people like crystals. Some people like Reiki. Some people, I mean, whatever it is, whatever fits your groove is what you need to do. And who gives a shit what anybody else thinks? This is not their journey. This is yours.
I'm curious about something on the writing, because I'm a writer, so I've always known there's like this mind-hand connection. And I noticed somebody said something, is it okay to do it on a tablet? It's not, I know it's not the same, but do you have like the scientific reason or whatever it is, why it's so different between doing it from brain to hand and writing on a piece of paper than on a tablet or on the computer and typing on the computer?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I did actually my TED talk on that. My TEDx talk was about that very thing. So there's 3 parts of the brain that are activated in the act of handwriting that are not activated when you use something electronic. And so if you guys are interested in that, definitely look at my channel for the TEDx talk, because it breaks that down. And there's actually, I broke down in that same talk, I broke down a correlation of when they stopped teaching writing in school and the crime stats of youth. There's a lot of things here that, I think you guys have probably learned. There's a lot of good questions. And what I like to do is follow up to answer some of the questions that come up. I think that'd be fun if you two would be willing to do that.
Yeah.
I have a great community, and I'm hoping that you all go ahead and connect with Caroline, connect with Dawn. And if you scroll down to below this broadcast, you'll find the links in the description. Anything exciting coming up?
I'm doing webinars, and I have October Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I have webinars every week that I'll be working on. And actually, those are actually going through the place that I work also. So it's going to be a double. It's going to be fun.
That'll be fun. Where are you headed next, Caroline?
Well, I'm actually, that's a good question. Because I'm back in West Palm Beach, what the whole journey took me on throughout the places that I went to in the United States. I came back here, and then all of a sudden things started shifting. So within the next couple of weeks, I think I should see some shifts happening I don't know. We'll see.
My stepdaughter lives in the area where this Lori Vallow Daybell, Chandler, Arizona. And so that's where the son lives. And so she called my husband and said, you guys need to see this. This is good. So I watched it, and now I finally know who it is. I think a perfect closing statement for this episode. He says, we had to go to Hawaii here, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it's very similar to, I didn't want my mom's story, to be our story. And that was super powerful to me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that is perfectly said. Because if it is somebody else's story, like from the slavery days or from World War II or World War I, or whenever it was, it's not your story. And so I think when you realize that it's not your story, there's like a little bit of a shift that goes on, because you are the one at this point. If you're coming here and you're this aware now of the inherited traumas and how it can epigenetically come into your space for the next 14 generations after you, then I think you're the one that's chosen to put a stop to it.
We are breaking the chain.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I appreciate everybody being here, and thank you, ladies, for joining me. And if you guys could please hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up, we would all appreciate that very much. And don't forget, their links to connect with both of them, or all 3 of us, are below. Thank you guys so much.
Bye, everybody.